Rage, panic, instant replies. Most people lose control within seconds, and manipulative minds count on that moment. Dirty people study emotions like weapons. One angry reaction gives them information. One emotional outburst gives them power. Meanwhile, silence creates tension they cannot predict. Calmness unsettles them. A controlled mind becomes dangerous because manipulation stops working against someone who refuses to react instantly. Hidden psychological studies reveal a shocking truth. The person who stays emotionally neutral during conflict usually controls the entire situation, not through force, not through louder words, through patience, through restraint, through mental discipline. Inside this video, powerful psychological tactics will reveal why immediate reactions destroy respect, why silence makes toxic people uncomfortable, and why calm behavior secretly shifts the balance of power. Certain techniques used by negotiators, elite leaders, and emotionally intelligent people will completely change the way conflict gets handled forever. Every second matters because one wrong emotional reaction can hand control directly to the person trying to manipulate the situation. By the end of this video, a completely different mindset will emerge. One that protects peace, strengthens confidence, and quietly places pressure back onto the people trying to provoke chaos. Rarely discussed truths about emotional control, manipulation, and psychological dominance are coming next, and missing even one point could leave the mind vulnerable in future conflicts. Welcome to Empath Energy, where emotional intelligence becomes real power. Subscribe now and join a community learning how to stay calm, strong, and impossible to manipulate. Chaos, drama, emotional traps. Manipulative people survive on one thing: reactions. Every time anger rises, every time frustration spills out, every time personal feelings get exposed, they gain another piece of control. That is why emotionally intelligent people use a quiet psychological tactic known as the gray rock method. Simple, cold, powerful. Instead of fighting for attention, they become emotionally unreadable. Short answers, calm voice, no unnecessary explanations, no emotional storytelling, no visible frustration. Manipulators expect emotional energy. They expect arguments, emotional breakdowns, defensive speeches, or desperate attempts to be understood. But calm silence ruins their strategy completely. Suddenly, the game becomes frustrating for them because there is nothing left to control. Notice how manipulative people often push harder when emotions appear. One angry reaction encourages another attack. One emotional confession becomes future ammunition. They carefully study emotional patterns, weaknesses, and insecurities. That is why oversharing becomes dangerous around toxic minds. Every personal detail can later become pressure, guilt, or manipulation. Emotionally strong people understand this deeply. Not everyone deserves access to personal emotions, private struggles, or inner fears. Quiet restraint protects peace more than emotional exposure ever will. The gray rock method does not mean becoming weak or emotionless. It means becoming disciplined. Calm responses create psychological distance. Neutral behavior removes emotional fuel from toxic conversations. Eventually, manipulative people grow irritated because their usual tricks stop working. No reaction means no reward. No drama means no power. And slowly, control shifts back into calmer hands. Real strength is not found inside loud arguments or emotional explosions. Real strength appears in the ability to stay steady while someone else desperately tries to pull emotions out of control. Confusion, mixed signals, twisted words. Manipulators rarely speak with complete clarity because confusion gives them room to escape responsibility. Vague statements create self-doubt. Unclear accusations create emotional pressure. Suddenly, energy gets wasted trying to decode hidden meanings instead of seeing the situation clearly. That is why calm questions become incredibly powerful. Simple questions, direct questions. What exactly did you mean by that? Can you explain that clearly? Can you repeat that? The moment clarity enters the conversation, manipulation starts losing strength. Toxic people often expect emotional reactions, not calm investigation. They expect anger, defensiveness, or panic. But calm curiosity forces them into an uncomfortable position. Now they must explain themselves. Now their contradictions become visible. Now their hidden intentions begin to surface. Emotionally intelligent people understand another important truth. Over-defending creates weakness. Long emotional explanations often signal insecurity. Manipulative minds notice this instantly. Every extra sentence becomes another opportunity to twist words or redirect blame. Strong people keep their responses short, calm, and controlled. One clear sentence carries more power than endless emotional defending. Confidence stays steady. Confidence does not beg to be believed. Another dangerous mistake is trusting words more than behavior. Manipulators often sound convincing. Their promises sound sincere. Their apologies sound emotional. But repeated actions reveal the real story. Patterns never lie. Someone who constantly disrespects boundaries while speaking kindly is still disrespectful. Someone who repeatedly creates chaos while promising peace is still toxic. Observing behavior without getting emotionally distracted changes everything. Quiet observation reveals motives people try hard to hide. Then comes another level of psychological strength: protecting personal information. Not every person deserves full access to private thoughts, fears, dreams, or insecurities. Manipulative individuals collect emotional details carefully. Later, those same details return as guilt, pressure, criticism, or control. Calm privacy becomes protection. Silence becomes strategy. The less emotional access toxic people receive, the harder it becomes for them to influence emotions, decisions, and peace of mind. Endless explanations, long emotional speeches, constant attempts to prove innocence. Manipulative people love this behavior because every extra word creates another opening to attack, twist, or control the conversation. Over-explaining often comes from fear. Fear of being misunderstood, rejected, or judged unfairly. But psychologically strong people understand something most never realize. Confidence speaks briefly, truth stays calm. One clear sentence delivered with certainty carries more weight than 10 emotional paragraphs filled with panic. Dirty people carefully watch emotional reactions. The moment someone starts desperately defending themselves, they sense uncertainty and push even harder. Suddenly, the conversation stops being about facts and becomes about emotional control. That is why powerful people remain composed. They answer clearly, then they stop talking. No begging to be understood, no exhausting attempts to convince everyone. Calm certainty creates respect far faster than emotional desperation ever could. Another powerful shift happens when attention moves away from words and toward patterns. Manipulators often sound intelligent, charming, and convincing. Their words may even feel comforting in the beginning. But repeated behavior always exposes hidden intentions. Someone who constantly lies but occasionally apologizes is still dishonest. Someone who repeatedly disrespects boundaries while speaking kindly is still toxic. Emotionally mature people stop getting hypnotized by beautiful words. They quietly study consistency instead. Patterns reveal character more honestly than promises ever will. Strong minds also learn to protect personal information carefully. Not every listener is trustworthy. Manipulative individuals collect emotional details like weapons waiting for the perfect moment. Personal fears become future insults. Vulnerabilities become pressure points. Dreams become targets for criticism. That is why emotional discipline matters deeply. Sharing less does not make someone cold, it makes them wise. Calm privacy creates safety. Silence protects peace. And the less emotional ammunition toxic people receive, the weaker their influence becomes. Eventually, manipulative minds begin feeling frustrated because their usual tactics stop finding emotional openings to control, pressure, or destabilize the situation. Beautiful words can become dangerous distractions. Manipulative people often sound convincing because they understand emotions better than most people realize. They know exactly when to apologize, exactly when to sound caring, and exactly when to promise change. But words alone reveal very little. Real truth hides inside repeated behavior. Someone may apologize 10 times, yet continue repeating the same disrespectful actions again and again. Someone may speak kindly in public while creating chaos in private. This is why emotionally intelligent people stop listening only with their hearts and start observing with their minds. Patterns expose intentions that speeches try to hide. Empty promises, guilt trips, fake remorse, sudden kindness after bad behavior. These patterns are not accidents. They are cycles. And once those cycles become visible, manipulation loses much of its power. Strong people also understand the value of emotional distance. Manipulators rely heavily on emotional access. They study reactions carefully. They notice fears, insecurities, personal struggles, and emotional triggers. Then, during conflict, those same details quietly return as pressure or control. That is why wise people stop revealing everything about themselves. Not every person deserves full access to private emotions. Silence protects peace more than endless emotional exposure ever will. Calm privacy creates psychological strength because toxic minds cannot easily weaponize information they never received. Another powerful habit is learning to use silence strategically. Most people become uncomfortable during silence and rush to fill the space with nervous explanations, emotional reactions, or unnecessary words. Manipulators count on this pressure. But calm silence changes the energy completely. A quiet pause after disrespect or manipulation forces tension back onto the other person. Suddenly they must sit with their own behavior. Suddenly their tactics feel exposed. Silence becomes powerful because it refuses to feed emotional chaos. Then comes one of the hardest skills of all: setting boundaries without guilt. Manipulative people constantly test limits. Small disrespect grows slowly over time. One tolerated behavior becomes another, then another, until emotional exhaustion replaces peace. Strong boundaries stop this cycle early. Calmly saying no without over-explaining confuses people who expect emotional weakness, guilt, or endless negotiation. Too much access creates danger. Manipulative people rarely attack immediately. First, they observe. They listen carefully to emotional reactions, personal struggles, insecurities, future plans, and hidden fears. Every detail becomes valuable information. Later, during conflict or tension, those same details quietly return as criticism, guilt, pressure, or emotional control. That is why emotionally intelligent people become extremely careful about who receives access to their inner world. Not everyone deserves personal truths. Not every listener carries good intentions. Silence protects more peace than endless emotional openness ever will. Privacy is not weakness. Privacy is psychological armor. Strong people understand another hidden truth. Oversharing often comes from the desire to feel understood, accepted, or emotionally connected. But toxic individuals can imitate understanding while secretly collecting emotional leverage. Suddenly, private dreams become targets for mockery. Personal fears become tools for intimidation. Emotional wounds become pressure points during arguments. This is why calm restraint becomes powerful. The less manipulative people know, the fewer weapons they can use later. Emotional discipline creates safety that loud emotional exposure cannot provide. Silence also creates psychological pressure in ways most people never notice. Manipulators expect emotional reactions. They expect immediate explanations, defensive speeches, or visible frustration. But calm silence interrupts their strategy completely. A quiet pause after disrespect often becomes more powerful than an emotional argument. Silence forces people to sit with their own words. It removes emotional fuel from the situation. And many toxic individuals become deeply uncomfortable when their behavior no longer creates the reaction they expected. Boundaries become equally important. Dirty people constantly test emotional limits little by little. One tolerated disrespect slowly becomes a pattern, then emotional exhaustion replaces peace. Strong minds stop this cycle early. They say no calmly, without guilt, without panic, without endless explanations. Manipulative people often become frustrated when boundaries appear because control becomes harder to maintain. Then comes another level of strength: moving quietly. Powerful people stop announcing every plan, every goal, and every next move. Silence creates advantage. Surprise creates leverage. Manipulators struggle to interfere with plans they never fully understood in the first place. Silence unsettles people more than anger ever could. Most manipulators expect immediate reactions. They expect emotional explosions, defensive speeches, nervous explanations, or desperate attempts to fix the tension. That reaction gives them control. But silence interrupts the entire pattern. A calm pause after an insult creates psychological pressure that words cannot match. Suddenly, the emotional energy they tried to throw at someone has nowhere to land. Strong people understand this deeply. They stay comfortable inside silence while others panic inside it. Weak minds rush to fill quiet moments because silence feels uncomfortable. Emotionally disciplined people use that discomfort strategically. They pause, they breathe, they stay calm. And that calmness quietly shifts power in the room. Manipulative individuals often rely on emotional speed. Fast reactions create mistakes. Emotional responses create openings, but silence slows everything down. It forces awareness back into the situation. A quiet stare after disrespect can expose more truth than an argument ever will. Toxic people become uncomfortable when their behavior no longer creates emotional chaos. Without emotional reactions, many manipulative tactics suddenly appear weak, obvious, and desperate. Strong boundaries become even more powerful when combined with silence. Saying less often creates more impact. Calm people do not endlessly argue to prove their value. They simply reduce access. They step back. They stop rewarding disrespect with attention, explanations, or emotional energy. This quiet distance becomes a consequence, and consequences teach people faster than emotional lectures ever will. Another hidden strength appears when someone stops revealing every future move. Manipulators thrive on predictability. They prepare interference when they fully understand someone's plans, emotions, or next steps. Quiet people become difficult to control because their actions speak before their words ever do. Silence creates unpredictability. Unpredictability creates psychological advantage. Then comes the most powerful shift of all, emotional detachment. The person who desperately needs approval, validation, or victory often becomes easiest to manipulate, but calm detachment changes everything. When emotional dependence disappears, clearer thinking begins. Fear weakens, pressure loses impact, and manipulators slowly realize their usual tactics no longer create emotional control. Small disrespect rarely stays small for long. Manipulative people constantly test limits little by little, watching carefully to see how much behavior gets tolerated before resistance appears. One ignored insult becomes another. One broken boundary becomes a pattern. Slowly, emotional exhaustion replaces peace. That is why the first calm no changes everything. Boundaries are not cruelty. Boundaries are self-respect in action. Emotionally strong people understand that protecting peace never requires permission from anyone. Manipulative individuals often react negatively when boundaries appear because limits remove access to control. Suddenly, emotional manipulation stops working as easily. Guilt stops controlling decisions. Pressure stops creating automatic compliance. And that shift frustrates people who benefited from emotional weakness. Many people struggle with boundaries because they fear disappointing others. They fear conflict, rejection, or being seen as selfish. But manipulative minds often use that fear as leverage. They rely on guilt to keep control alive. That is why emotionally disciplined people stop over-explaining their limits. One calm sentence becomes enough. No anger, no panic, no emotional speech, just clarity, just firmness. People who truly respect someone will respect boundaries too. People who only valued access, control, or convenience often become angry the moment limits appear. And that reaction reveals everything. Silence strengthens boundaries even further. Calm distance often teaches stronger lessons than emotional arguments ever could. Instead of fighting endlessly to change toxic behavior, strong people quietly reduce access, less emotional energy, less availability, less explanation. Manipulators usually expect endless chances, emotional debates, or emotional guilt, but calm consequences force reality into the situation. Another powerful shift happens when someone stops announcing every thought, every future plan, and every emotional struggle. Quiet people become difficult to manipulate because there is less emotional information available to exploit. Silence creates unpredictability. Unpredictability creates strength, and emotionally detached people become even harder to control. Once desperation for approval disappears, fear loses power. The need to constantly win every argument fades away. Emotional calmness sharpens judgment while manipulative tactics slowly lose their effect against a mind that no longer reacts the way it once did. Loose words create unnecessary vulnerability. Manipulative people pay close attention to future plans, emotional goals, personal ambitions, and upcoming decisions because information gives them time to interfere. The more they know, the easier it becomes to create obstacles, plant doubt, spread negativity, or quietly sabotage progress before momentum even begins. Strategic people understand this deeply. They move quietly. They stop announcing every idea, every next move, and every personal victory before it fully develops. Silence creates protection. Silence creates unpredictability. And unpredictability makes manipulation far more difficult. Many people reveal too much because they seek validation, encouragement, or emotional support, but not every listener wants success for others. Some people secretly compete while pretending to care. Others smile while waiting for opportunities to discourage confidence or weaken motivation. That is why emotionally intelligent people become careful with information. They allow results to speak louder than promises. Quiet action creates stronger impact than endless announcements ever could. Real power often grows in silence long before anyone notices it. Manipulators also struggle when they cannot predict emotional reactions. Someone who constantly explains every thought becomes easy to study, easy to pressure, easy to provoke. But calm, disciplined people become difficult to read. Their silence creates uncertainty. Their emotional restraint removes openings for manipulation. Toxic individuals often feel frustrated around quiet confidence because there is less emotional access available to control. Then comes another major shift: emotional detachment from outcomes. Desperation weakens judgment. The stronger the emotional need for approval, validation, revenge, or victory, the easier manipulation becomes. Fear begins controlling decisions. Anxiety clouds thinking, but emotionally detached people operate differently. They stay calm whether others approve or not. They stay steady whether someone agrees or disagrees. This emotional balance creates enormous psychological strength because manipulation loses effectiveness against someone who no longer reacts from desperation. And finally, consequences become necessary. Manipulative behavior often continues because too many people tolerate it without response. Strong individuals stop rewarding disrespect with endless patience, emotional energy, or repeated chances. Calm distance, reduced access, quiet withdrawal. These consequences speak louder than emotional arguments ever could, and manipulative people quickly realize their actions no longer produce the control they once enjoyed. Emotional desperation blinds people faster than manipulation ever could. The stronger the need for approval, validation, attention, or victory, the easier it becomes for toxic individuals to control emotions and influence decisions. Manipulators study attachment carefully. They notice who fears rejection, who craves acceptance, and who cannot tolerate losing emotional connection. Then they quietly use those emotional needs as leverage. That is why emotional detachment becomes one of the most powerful forms of psychological strength. Calm detachment sharpens thinking. It removes panic from decision-making. It creates space between emotions and reactions. And suddenly, situations become easier to read clearly. The person who emotionally depends less often controls the emotional frame. Not because they are cold or heartless, but because fear no longer controls their behavior. Manipulators lose power when emotional reactions disappear. Guilt loses effectiveness, pressure loses intensity, emotional traps stop working against someone who no longer desperately needs validation from the very people creating the chaos. Strong people stay grounded inside themselves. They stop chasing approval from toxic minds. They stop trying to force respect from people committed to disrespect. And that quiet shift changes everything. Another powerful truth appears here. Manipulative behavior survives when consequences never arrive. Endless forgiveness without boundaries teaches toxic people that disrespect will always be tolerated. Emotionally strong individuals understand that calm consequences create more impact than emotional arguments. Sometimes the strongest response is distance. Less access, less attention, less emotional availability, not revenge, not drama, just quiet withdrawal of energy. And suddenly, manipulators begin realizing their actions no longer produce the same emotional control they once enjoyed. Real psychological strength is not about dominating every conflict or winning every argument. It is about staying emotionally balanced while others try to create instability. Calm people think more clearly under pressure. Quiet confidence exposes manipulation faster than anger ever could. And when someone fully masters emotional discipline, manipulative people often become frustrated because their usual tactics stop creating fear, panic, guilt, or emotional chaos. Manipulative behavior continues for one simple reason: it keeps getting rewarded. Every time disrespect receives endless patience, every time toxic behavior receives emotional attention, and every time boundaries collapse under guilt, manipulators learn that their tactics still work. That is why emotionally strong people stop feeding unhealthy patterns. They stop arguing endlessly with people committed to misunderstanding them. They stop explaining themselves to those who twist every word. And most importantly, they stop rewarding disrespect with continued emotional access. Calm consequences create deeper impact than emotional explosions ever could. Anger may feel powerful for a moment, but consistent emotional discipline changes behavior far more effectively. Quiet distance sends a stronger message than desperate arguments. Reduced access changes the emotional dynamic completely. Less attention, less availability, less emotional energy. Suddenly, manipulative individuals realize the control they once enjoyed is slowly disappearing. Walking away also becomes a form of strength. Not every battle deserves energy. Not every disrespect deserves a reaction. Strong minds recognize the difference between temporary conflict and destructive patterns that will never change. Some people only learn through loss of access. Some only understand boundaries once emotional availability disappears completely. And emotionally mature people accept this reality without guilt. Cutting communication when necessary is not cruelty, it is protection. Peace matters, mental clarity matters, emotional stability matters. Constant exposure to manipulation slowly drains confidence, focus, and inner calm. That is why disciplined people become careful about where their energy goes. They no longer stay trapped inside endless cycles of guilt, drama, pressure, and emotional exhaustion. They choose distance over chaos, clarity over confusion, self-respect over toxic attachment. Manipulators often become frustrated when emotional reactions disappear because emotional control was the very thing keeping their influence alive. But once calm consequences replace emotional arguments, the entire power dynamic begins to shift. Silence becomes stronger. Boundaries become firmer. Emotional discipline becomes sharper. And slowly, toxic behavior loses the ability to create the fear, confusion, guilt, or emotional instability it once depended on so heavily. Dirty people survive because most people react emotionally. They provoke anger, create confusion, trigger guilt, and wait for emotional chaos to take control. But true strength changes the entire game. Calmness becomes power. Silence becomes protection. Boundaries become self-respect. Observation reveals hidden intentions. Emotional detachment creates freedom. These are not signs of weakness. These are psychological weapons that protect peace, clarity, and inner stability in a world filled with manipulation. The biggest victory is never revenge. Revenge keeps emotions connected to toxic people. Real power comes from mastering yourself, From staying calm when others expect rage, from walking away when others expect desperation, from protecting peace without guilt. Because the moment someone can no longer control emotions, they begin losing control over life itself. Many people spend years trying to change manipulative individuals, only to realize the real transformation starts inside their own mindset. Strong minds stop chasing validation from toxic people. Strong minds stop explaining themselves endlessly. Strong minds choose discipline over drama. And once that emotional discipline becomes stronger, manipulation starts losing its grip completely. Every lesson in this video is not just about dealing with toxic people. It is about becoming mentally untouchable, calm under pressure, clear under confusion, strong without becoming cruel. And remember this: silence can protect more peace than 1,000 arguments ever will. Thanks for watching Empath Energy. If this video spoke to you, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and join this growing community focused on emotional intelligence, inner strength, and real psychological power. Because the strongest person in the room is not the loudest one, it is the one who stays calm while chaos loses its power.